It wasn't just a place to stand, it was a battlefield. The shed end at Stamford Bridge wasn't just where Chelsea fans gathered, it was where reputations were made or destroyed. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, every big firm in the country knew if you could take the shed, even for just one match day, you'd be remembered forever. But most who tried didn't leave with pride. Some didn't leave at all. This is the story of 7 firms, the toughest in England, who tried to take the Chelsea shed. Some came close. Most got battered. Let's go back to where it all began, with a firm that feared no one, West Ham's ICF. In the world of firms, few names carried more weight than West Ham's ICF, the intercity firm. They didn't just turn up, they planned, moved smart, and hit hard. And in the early 1980s, they set their sights on one of the most dangerous targets in football, the shed end at Stamford Bridge. West Ham were no strangers to trouble. Their firm would travel deep into enemy ground, not for fun, but for control. On one visit to the bridge, stories say the ICF came mob-handed. Dozens of lads, all in firm gear, ready for war. They didn't sneak around. They marched straight through Fulham Broadway, shouting for the shed. But the Headhunters were waiting. Chelsea's firm wasn't just tough, they were territorial. Fights exploded on the terraces. Bottles flew, fists landed, and blood hit the concrete. Some West Ham boys reached the edge of the shed, but they didn't take it. The Headhunters stood firm and sent a message. This is our house. West Ham's attempt went down as one of the boldest challenges to the shed ever, but they weren't the only ones, because Millwall were next, and they came with chaos. If West Ham came with planning, Millwall came with fury. The Bushwackers weren't just another firm, they were one of the most unpredictable and violent mobs in British football history. Based in South London, they were never far from the bridge. And when Millwall and Chelsea met, it wasn't just a game, it was London turf war. The Bushwackers had a reputation for ambushes, chaos, and fear. They didn't care about outnumbering, they cared about sending a message. One Saturday in the early 80s, that message came loud and clear. Millwall lads appeared near Stamford Bridge with no warning. No trains, no big march, just a sudden storm of fists and bricks. Some reports say they got near the shed, attacking Chelsea supporters from the side. Others claim they made a push onto the terrace itself, looking to take it from inside. Either way, it was carnage. Chelsea's Headhunters responded instantly. What followed was one of the most brutal unreported scraps in shed end history. It wasn't about numbers, it was personal. Punches turned into beatings. People were thrown down steps, and in the middle of it all, both sets of fans were shouting the same thing. This is our end. In the end, Millwall didn't hold the shed, but they left scars, and Chelsea never forgot them. But while Millwall were feared in London, the next firm came from the north, and they came with something to prove. Leeds United, the service crew. Unlike London firms, Leeds didn't have home advantage, but what they did have was attitude and ambition. The Leeds service crew weren't like the rest. They didn't just fight for territory, they fought for reputation, and they wanted everyone to know their name. In the 70s and 80s, Leeds had one of the best traveling mobs in the country. Stylish clothes, young lads, fast movements. But don't let the fashion fool you, they were dangerous. And they weren't scared of London. Over the years, the service crew made multiple runs through West London, looking for a reaction. Chelsea away became one of their most targeted fixtures, not just for the football, but for the challenge. Reports from the mid-80s say that one Leeds mob arrived early, some disguised as regular fans. They made their way towards the shed quietly. Then, in a flash, it kicked off. Punches, bottles, concrete barriers torn down. Leeds had come to make a statement. One witness said, it was like they wanted to plant a flag in the middle of the shed. But Chelsea didn't just fight, they hunted. And by the time the dust settled, the service crew had been pushed back. Not embarrassed, but beaten. It was one of the few places in England the crew couldn't hold, but that didn't stop others from trying. Next came one of the biggest mobs in the game, Manchester United's Red Army. The Red Army didn't sneak into town, they flooded it. In the 1970s, Manchester United's firm became infamous across England, not just for violence, but for sheer size. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, followed United away, and when they came to Stamford Bridge, it was a security nightmare. But behind the chants and banners was a crew looking to dominate. Red Army lads didn't always fight to take ends, but sometimes the mob got bold. On one chaotic visit to Chelsea, stories say United fans pushed straight towards the shed, flooding into the area and trying to hold their ground. They wanted the noise, they wanted the pride, and for a few minutes, they had it. But not for long. The Headhunters moved in. It didn't matter how big the Red Army looked from outside. Inside the shed, numbers meant nothing without heart. What followed was short and savage. bodies thrown backwards, screams across the terrace. One local paper called it a red tide that was quickly turned back. The Red Army came with one of the biggest reputations in England, but at the bridge, that wasn't enough. Still, not every mob came from far. The next firm, they came from just down the road, and they hated Chelsea more than anyone. Tottenham Hotspur's Yid Army. If there was one firm that didn't just want to take the shed, they wanted to burn it down. It was Tottenham's Yid Army. This wasn't just a firm versus firm. This was a war of postcodes. North London versus West London. Hatred in its purest form. Derby days were marked in blood. From the 70s through the 90s, Spurs lads made multiple attempts to take the shed. Some came in small mobs, dressed down. Others marched loud, ready to fight. One clash in the late 80s still echoes in firm circles. A group of Yid Army regulars pushed towards the shed just after kickoff. Bottles were hidden in coat sleeves, scarves wrapped tight. As they reached the edge of the terrace, all hell broke loose. The Headhunters didn't wait. It turned into a full-on terrace riot. Not just fists, but boots, metal bars, and bile. One Chelsea lad later said, "They made it onto the shed once, but they never left the same." The Yid Army had numbers, and they had venom. But Chelsea? They had one job on Derby Day: protect the shed at all costs. Spurs never fully took it, but they made sure it was never quiet. And while Tottenham had history with Chelsea, the next mob, they came from Wales. They weren't part of any London feud, but they came for reputation. Cardiff City's Soul Crew. Most firms that came for the shed had history with Chelsea, but the Soul Crew, they came for the buzz. Cardiff City's firm was one of the most fearless and unpredictable mobs of the 80s and 90s. They weren't the biggest, but they had one thing that made them dangerous: nothing to lose. The Soul Crew built their name by going after big targets: Leeds, West Ham, Millwall, and in the early 90s they set their sights on Chelsea. Some say it happened during a cup tie. Others remember it as a friendly that turned anything but. But what's clear is this: a group of Cardiff lads dressed casual came to London with a plan: hit the shed and cause chaos. They moved in fast, avoiding police, slipping through side streets, and for a few minutes it looked like they might pull off the unthinkable. Then the Headhunters appeared. Local knowledge, faster reactions, no mercy. One Soul Crew member later admitted, "We came for a name. We left with broken noses." Cardiff didn't take the shed, but they earned respect for trying, and their attack proved one thing: even from across the border, the shed was a target. But before the story ends, there's one more firm, from the heart of the Midlands, a group that didn't care where they were as long as there was a fight: the Zulu Warriors. By the late 80s, one firm was starting to make serious noise, far from London, far from the usual names. The Zulu Warriors. Birmingham City's firm was young, mixed race, and fearless. They didn't copy anyone. They built their own style: fast, loud, aggressive. The Zulus didn't wait to be invited. They went looking for trouble, and in the early 90s they came down to Stamford Bridge. This wasn't a regular London derby, it was a statement trip. Some came by train, others by car, and as soon as they hit Fulham Broadway, they moved in groups, looking for the shed. Reports say around 30 to 40 Zulu lads got close. Some Chelsea fans didn't even know who they were until fists started flying. The Zulus came with speed and numbers, but the Headhunters weren't new to this. The shed turned into a wall of fists. The Zulus tried to push up the terrace steps, but each step met resistance. One Chelsea lad said it was like they were trying to run up a hill made of bricks. The fight didn't last long. The Zulus retreated, loud but beaten. Still, in true Zulu fashion, they weren't silent about it. They left graffiti near the away end: "Zulu was here." They didn't take the shed, but they made sure no one forgot their visit. And that brings us to the bigger question: why did no one ever really take the shed? Because it wasn't just a part of the stadium, it was Chelsea's fortress. The Headhunters treated the shed like sacred ground. Taking it wasn't just a fight, it was a declaration of war. And no mob, not ICF, not Millwall, not even the Red Army, could hold off what came next. To take the shed, you'd have to go through dozens of lads who were born and raised inside it. That's why it stayed Chelsea's. That's why it became a legend.